Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Manager for HAR. I'm joined this morning by Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you all.
Before we get into all our questions that we have for you, I just want to remind everyone today is the last day to register to vote if you're going to be voting in the November 5th election. So make sure you visit votetexas.gov and check to see if you're registered to vote. But if you're not, go ahead and register. So Congressman Crenshaw, thank you again for joining us. We're really excited to have you this morning.
Oh, great to be with you.
So you've been in office almost a year now. Tell us your experience. How has it been?
Well, it's an interesting time to be in politics. We've got an interesting freshman class, and it makes a lot of noise. So, to say the least. And it's been fulfilling. Even, of course, we're in the minority, and I do think that a lot of legislation passing out of the House, to be frank, is extremist in nature. It has no chance of going through the Senate or even being considered by the Senate. So there's been some frustration there. Because you have to ask the question, what's the point of passing these big bills? They're not going anywhere.
Right.
And I think that's a good question to ask, Pelosi and House leadership. Well, what is the point of these, basically, what are just messaging bills? And, they haven't gone through the normal markup process. There's no real negotiation going on. There's no desire to make them work. And that's been unfortunate. But it's also been fulfilling because there are other things we can accomplish. There are small bipartisan wins that happen pretty often, and really every Monday it's a fly-in day, which is kind of like we all get a long day, all right, and which means we suspend the rules and they vote on things in a bipartisan way. Now, these aren't solving huge problems, but they do solve some, and even things like, and I know we'll get to this later, but the National Flood Insurance Program that passed unanimously out of the Financial Services Committee. So things really do happen in a bipartisan manner when they can. It's not so toxic that we can't even work on things that we truly agree on.
Right.
So that's good. And with respect to flooding in my district, we've been able to work with the administration on things. So that doesn't require legislation, just requires working with federal entities. And so that's been satisfying.
Yes, and our members thank you for that, all your work with that. We hear sometimes about expectations versus reality, especially with new congressmen. How has that expectation matched up with reality?
Pretty well. I didn't get into this as an idealist or naive, and everybody, a lot of freshmen I see campaigned on we're just going to get things done. This time it'll be different. We'll just get things done. That's a little bit of that's a false thing to promise, frankly, and they haven't come back and actually been able to deliver on that promise because Washington isn't set up that way, and I always knew it wasn't set up that way. Our founders didn't set it up that way. It's hard to get 435 people to agree on something that affects the lives of the entire country, over 300 million people. So it's important to put that into context. And I always say to people, go out to dinner with some friends with no cameras on you, nobody recording what you're saying, and talk about a really complex issue and tell us you're going to solve that really easily. We'll have a hard time. Now add 400 people to that dinner party and put cameras on you and record everything you say and make sure that everybody attacks each other in totally bad faith. It's really hard to solve complex problems, and it's supposed to be, okay? The reality is that there's a lot of different preferences and issues and problems that are different spanning across the country. It's why we have a federalist system. It's why we like to push control down to the state level, and up in Congress, we should really be solving problems that we are sure need to be solved by the federal level. Unfortunately, we don't always do that. Unfortunately, the American people often demand that Washington does something. And sometimes that makes sense. Sometimes it does, but not all the time. And I think we'd be better off if we got a little less confused about that and differentiated between federal, state, and local priorities and authorities and jurisdictions. So. But overall, about the same. I worked on the Hill for a little bit before I ran. I had no intention of running, but at the time. But I worked on there a little bit. I've been involved in policy for a long time, so it's not all that surprising to me. But overall, I was surprised that we don't get a gym membership at the House. You still got it. You've got to seek that out and pay for it. We're not cutting any corners up there.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, we are with Congressman Dan Crenshaw this morning. We're very thankful that he was able to join us. Obviously, we're not in the same room. He's a very busy man. But if you have any questions for him, go ahead and type them into the comments, and I'll get to those in a little bit. I wanted to ask you, there's been a lot of elected officials lately that have announced they're not seeking re-election or they're announcing retirement. Do you think there's a reason behind that?
Well, you have to ask them. When people retire, they keep it very close hold. I have personally not. I've personally not known about any of these retirements until they actually happened. In some, everybody's got their own reasons. In some cases, we have some very senior members in the Texas delegation. On the Republican side, we term limit leadership, so you can only hold a ranking member chairman position for so long. The Democrats don't do that, so. There's pros and cons to that, but that might be one reason. They might want to spend more time with family. It's a whole number of possibilities. But I'm not that worried about it. Some people think it's a sign of some kind of crisis. I really don't think it is. Everybody has personal reasons for why they do things, and it also opens up the opportunity for a whole new array of fresh blood to come in and represent Texas.
Absolutely. Kind of a heavy subject here. I wanted to ask you, in light of the recent mass shootings, is there something you feel can be done?
Yeah, well, you have to rely on certain principles when you're looking at a problem like this. First, let's go to what we are doing. One thing I'm a lead sponsor on is the TAPS Act, a Threat Assessment and Prevention and Safety Act. So this is basically a behavioral threat assessment program that has existed at the federal level for a long time. It's basically a set of tools and training for law enforcement. Okay, so that they can identify and, more importantly, filter through and sift through threats and indicators so that they can better manage their resources and target mass shooters. When it comes to mass shooters, and I think we should actually further define that.
Okay.
We're really talking about indiscriminate shootings, right? So, because a mass shooting could be a gang shooting. Well, that's a very different set of prevention measures than say, one of these indiscriminate shootings, which is generally carried out by somebody who's very, very disturbed, very angry, and basically conducting a copycat crime. I mean, these didn't happen before Columbine. So, we have to ask ourselves why that is. And there's a bit of a psychological factor to this. There's a copycat crime that keeps happening. And you can't just wish that away with, and of course we get into the notion of gun control. The question you have to ask with gun control is this going to do good or is it going to feel good? Everybody wants to feel good and take action. But if the policy we're talking about wouldn't have stopped the last shooting or the last 10 shootings or even the last 20 shootings, and by the way, none of the gun control measures we're talking about really would have, well, then why are we talking about it? So we have to first use that, we have to harness that emotional reaction to take some kind of action, to just do something, and then ask, will this do something actually work? And also, will it be infringing on the rights of law-abiding citizens as a result? So we should be protecting the rights of law-abiding citizens, and then we should be looking for those who are posing a threat. Because when you're posing a threat, you are, by definition, infringing on somebody else's rights. When you're doing that, well, you no longer have your rights protected when you infringe on somebody else's rights. That's the basics of how our justice system works. And so we have to do better on that. The 21st Century the 21st Century NICS Act is also a step in that direction. Okay. That would have stopped, for instance, the Charleston shooter. Instead of giving an automatic waiver after 3 days of a background check, this streamlines that process quite a bit. So we have to make sure that the laws we have will have are actually implemented correctly, and then we have to ask that very important question: would this have stopped the last thing? And so with this 21st Century NICS Act, yeah, it would have stopped something. So maybe we should actually look at that. With the TAPS Act, gives law enforcement better tools to actually identify shooters who always have a lot of indicators. I mean, in hindsight, a lot of these shooters have a lot of indicators that they would have done something terrible. We can actually do something about that, as opposed to sort of sweeping gun control measures that really do infringe on people's rights while also not really solving the problem.
All right. Very good. Shifting gears a little bit here, the National Flood Insurance Program, you mentioned it earlier. Do you support a long-term reauthorization of the NFIP?
Yeah, I think we all want that. That would give us a lot of predictability in the market, and so then especially so when realtors are speaking to clients, you can tell them this program will be in place for you in case you're worried about it. So yeah, of course, I think that's a very important step in the right direction.
Right. So the current reauthorization is set to expire November 21st. Do you see a longer-term solution after that?
I do. I mean, in financial service, like I said, they passed the new bill out, I believe unanimously.
Mm-hmm.
So there's obviously some broad agreement there. That it's getting, as I understand it, it's getting stopped up from going to the floor for a vote because there is some concern about premiums rising too rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a valid concern, but that concern also means that the program is going to cost even more money. Money that we don't have and that we're already spending too much of in other places. So we need to figure that out and find the right balance there. But I think there's a good amount of support, of course, for this is one of those bipartisan things where we all want to get this done.
Absolutely. I'm going to take a quick second to see questions we have come in from our members. A couple of people telling you good this morning. Good morning from Huntsville, Texas. Question here from Chris. How are we coming with the FEMA flood money? Do we have projects coming to help with flood control?
Is that referring to Tropical Storm Imelda?
I believe so.
So, I mean, we just got that authorized last week. I led the letter from the Houston delegation to ask the president to authorize that after Governor Abbott had requested it. So, FEMA money is generally not for projects. It can be in some cases. For instance, one of our big accomplishments these last few months was we were able to get FEMA to continue the dredging in the San Jacinto River, which, that dredging alone may have saved some houses during Tropical Storm Imelda. Generally, though, this is for disaster relief. So if you've been flooded, this FEMA comes in with assistance. So that's the first thing that on our priority list is helping the people who were flooded.
Very good. We actually had a question submitted offline asking if you would be in support of or propose legislation to require developers to complete drainage project prior to initiation of home building.
Well, that's a county issue. That would never be done at the federal level.
Okay.
And this gets to what I said before. I mean, we all have to understand where things happen at each level of government. Mm-hmm. And Harris County has recently changed, as I believe, some of their developing standards. We need Montgomery County to do the same. That's the next fight because they don't believe they have a flooding problem, but it turns out that when they don't have the same standards, they flood us downstream.
Sure. Question from Lois about HR 2. She said, as I understand, it's a big infrastructure flood relief bill known as WRDA bill. Is still in committee, or where is it?
If you're talking about a WRDA, WRDA, that happens in transportation infrastructure, and mm-hmm. I'm not so sure that it's called HR 2, but
okay.
Yeah, but that's I'm not in that committee, and it sounds like it's not even been voted on yet. So okay. that a WRDA is approved every 2 years. That's what's used for Army Corps of Engineers projects and things of that nature. So it's an important infrastructure bill.
Okay. JJ is asking, how do you feel about the governor removing control of the Harvey recovery funds from Mayor Turner?
I don't. Is the implication that he's done that? I'm not so sure that he's.
I believe so.
You guys are asking me about local politics and not federal politics, but which is fine. But I don't think that he's totally done that, and I'm not aware of the exact details of how the state and Mayor Turner are interacting on that, and it also depends on what funds they're talking about. There's a lot of different buckets of funds for mitigation projects, and so it's not clear what the question is referring to.
Okay, one question that you definitely can answer came in from Chris is how can we help you? As we have, as you know, 39,000 members. How can we help you?
Hey, things like this are great. Let us connect with everybody and hear from you, and on legislation that affects you, like NFIP, whether it's or more or financial services legislation that affects mortgages. We just want to hear from you, and let us know what we're not seeing, because there's always a chance that we think something's a good idea, but the people on the ground may have different thoughts about that. And
Hmm.
so that's why we hear from you all.
Very good. And I think even though, like you're saying, some of these questions are local or need to be handled by counties, it's good for us to hear that from you to make you aware of it. But you can maybe even redirect our members if they're coming to the wrong person.
Exactly, exactly. And it's often confusing to people to understand what level of government things happen at. But we're always here to answer those questions.
Yeah. Um, so, as you may know, we had Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher on a few weeks ago. She talked about H.R. 2. Lois is asking, she said it was one of the top bills to be addressed in season this Congress. It's a big flood relief bill. I guess she's looking for your thoughts on that.
You just asked about HR2.
Hmm.
That was the WRDA. If it's the WRDA bill, which happens in transportation infrastructure, that happens every 2 years. So
Sure.
that's an authorization for the Army Corps of Engineers projects,
Hmm.
and it generally gets passed every 2 years. It's generally pretty bipartisan, and as far as the Houston delegation, we'll just be making sure that we're looking at projects that affect Houston, of course, especially given the recent flooding we've had and what needs to happen to mitigate that. I mean, let's just talk about people are concerned about flooding. Let's talk about flooding more broadly and what's happened and what
Okay.
we're waiting on. There's a so the funding that we need for a lot of these mitigation projects has already been implemented. This new WRDA has nothing to do with that, really. What we're looking at right now is a regional study. Okay, you need to do the regional study. It's going to take a long time, unfortunately, because this stuff has been getting kicked down. The can has been getting kicked down the road for a very long time,
Hmm.
and that's unfortunate. It took Hurricane Harvey to get everybody to work together and actually get this done. So there's a 3-year regional study that takes place. From that, and this is between Harris County Flood Control District and the Army Corps of Engineers. From that, we understand what mitigation projects need to happen. Okay, now for my district, I'm looking at what mitigation needs to happen in the Cypress Creek area, Addicks and Barker reservoirs, over in the San Jacinto. What kind of detention needs to take place upstream so that we're not flooding downstream? So Montgomery County has to have a part of this. Those are the sort of projects we're looking at. How do you get water out of Addicks Bayou faster and down Buffalo? All right, these are questions. I mean, they're looking at all sorts of different options, whether it's underground tunnels or expanding capacity, whatever that is. But that study needs to happen, and it's long and it's expensive, and but it has to be detailed because we're talking about billions and billions of dollars in projects. You don't want to get it wrong. So that's really the first thing that we're looking at. In the meantime, we've just been able to work with FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers to get other things done, like Langham Creek silt removal. Okay, that was a really big deal. Just getting the Army to redesignate that as something other than wetlands, so that we could actually get that permitting through the permitting processes, given from the EPA and environmental standards, really get in the way of some really common sense reforms or common sense projects. And so we're always fighting those back. Like I said before, the dredging in the San Jacinto, we're able to get money for the Lake Houston gates so that we can easier empty out that water. Those are the kind of projects that actually matter. And again, that's not necessarily connected with HR2. Some of them might be, but I guess the good news is we're doing them anyway. So we're getting some things done, and we're moving in the right direction. We don't have to wait on the next WRDA.
Great. Thank you for that. Um, Another question came in from Chris. He's asking, how are we doing for the VA? Is there anything happening to improve services for our vets?
Yeah. So the Mission Act was passed last session, which is a pretty big reform to the VA, towards more choice for veterans, and now it's being implemented. So it's going to take some time. We're going to be watching closely how that gets implemented, and what the pitfalls are and what needs to be improved upon when implementing something like that. Every VA is different too. I've personally gotten care at a variety of VAs, and when you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. They all have different problems. You're dealing with a giant bureaucracy. Anytime you're dealing with a giant bureaucracy, it's going to work slower than we would like, and that's the unfortunate reality. I think the Houston VA works quite well in comparison to other VAs that I've been to, and that's a product of good administrators there and people, and good management as well. One thing the Trump administration did was make it easier to hire and fire VA employees. I think that's a huge step in the right direction. In federal government in general, it's very hard to fire anybody who's not doing their job. And it's one of the reasons government doesn't work all that fast. Yeah, you can't even imagine that in the private sector, but that's the way it is in the federal sector. So changing that in the VA was a good move, and so we'll keep looking at options like that.
That's great. A question came in from Angie. As you know, realtors are self-employed and health insurance is very expensive. Deductibles are high. Is there a plan to improve Obamacare to help? Private health insurance is not an option for most because of pre-existing conditions.
Well, yeah. So, let's hit the pre-existing conditions thing for a second. So, there's been a massive lie told for a very long time that Republicans are against pre-existing conditions. That's not true. We support state-level solutions for pre-existing conditions like reinsurance programs or state risk pools. We support those because they work. A lot of states, blue states and red states, by the way, have implemented these programs via the 1332 waivers. 1332 waiver is a section of Obamacare that allows states to basically not use Obamacare and do their own experiment on what would actually work for the people in that state. And a lot of states have been very successful, so they've protected people with pre-existing conditions while also lowering premiums, because they basically remove the people with pre-existing conditions out of that same risk pool, because that's what makes everybody's premiums go up. So you can have both here in this case. Interestingly enough, the Protecting People with Pre-Existing Conditions Act, which was passed out of the House just a few months ago, did away with the 1332 waiver. People need to know that. So we voted against it because the 1332 waiver is the only thing that actually makes this system work and can lower premiums and protect people with pre-existing conditions. Okay, the Democrats in the House voted to get rid of that. You have to ask yourself why that is, and it's really just it was a messaging bill to make it seem like we were voting against pre-existing conditions. This is the kind of stuff that happens in Washington if you want to know some disappointing things. One thing I'm working on also to help people, especially this would be really great for realtors in particular who buy their own private health insurance, is looking at direct primary care options. So I think if we can solve the primary care shortage in this country, we'll lower premiums, we'll keep people out of the emergency room, and you'll finally have an actual relationship with your doctor. And in the Houston area, there are more and more direct primary care physicians. Okay, basically that means you are a primary care physician and you have a subscription service basically to a lot of patients. And this could be about $80 a month. And then that comes with a bunch of services. Okay, it's not insurance, it's not catastrophic insurance, but it is primary care, which is what most people need most of the time.
Right.
And then you get basically unlimited access to your doctor because of that. Companies or real estate organizations or such as yourself, associations of realtors, you can contract with direct primary care doctors. Okay, and now this takes insurance out of it. This takes everything out of it. You have finally one relationship with that doctor, and it's highly affordable. And when insurance companies get wind of this, they want to lower your premiums because now they know that you have this great setup. So we're looking at ways to expand that rapidly. And I don't want to give too much away right now, but we are going to be coming out with legislation on that front. And it's a great model that I think gets us on a path to solving our healthcare problems, because everything starts with primary care.
Absolutely. That would be great. Switching gears a little bit, and if you have any other questions, we have just a couple more minutes with Congressman Crenshaw, so go ahead and type those in. We talked briefly about infrastructure earlier. What do you think is the likelihood of an infrastructure package, moving through Congress this session?
I don't hear a lot of talk about that. as much anymore. And, the question is always, well, what does that mean, right?
Mhm.
What does an infrastructure package actually mean? Are we just going to just throw out a bunch of money and see what sticks? I'm not so sure that's the best angle. Um, in the end, this is up to House leadership and what their priorities are. Their priorities have been much different than an infrastructure bill as of late. So I don't see them focusing on that right now. I'm currently unaware of any big ideas coming out of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, but I'm not on that committee.
Okay. We had a comment come in from Chris. He said, in response to the earlier question about VA assistance, he said Houston is the second largest population of veterans in the U.S. Over 350,000 are living here. We thank you for your service and for calling Houston home. VA home loans are a great tool for helping veterans buy homes.
That's true. That's true. There was recently in the last year or so we've made it easier for that to happen too. So veterans can buy I think use jumbo loans from the VA too. So that's a huge benefit for a lot of veterans.
Yeah. So another question asking, how can we help you, Congressman Crenshaw? You answered this earlier, but if there's any other way that we can help, please let us know.
No, you guys are doing. I'm here for you, not the other way around.
Very good. So that looks like all the questions we actually have from our members. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Hey, always great to be with you guys. You guys are such hard workers. Keep our housing market afloat. We appreciate it. And no, just a real pleasure to be with y'all.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us. And of course, thank you again for your service. That's it for this Member Focus Monday. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week at 9 a.m. Have a great week.